I got fired after my team stole my life-saving formula. What they didn't know destroyed them. Dr. Stevens will see you now, the receptionist said, avoiding eye contact. I'd been sitting in that sterile waiting area for 20 minutes, watching colleagues hurry past without acknowledgement. My name is Dr. James Mitchell, 43 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, senior biochemist at one of the most prestigious biotech firms on the East Coast. For 8 years, I'd been the backbone of their oncology research division. 3 patents, 12 published papers, and a breakthrough formula that could revolutionize cancer treatment. The same formula that was about to become someone else's legacy. I walked into Stephen's office to find Sarah Chen already seated. My former research partner, the woman I'd mentored for 5 years, trained on every technique, shared every discovery with. Beside her sat Marcus Webb, the lab coordinator who'd joined our team just 18 months ago. Both avoided my eyes. "James," Dr. Stevens began, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention." I remained silent, though my hands instinctively moved to the folder in my lap. Inside were my personal research notes, the real ones, not the sanitized versions I kept in the lab database. "There have been allegations," Stevens continued, "about research integrity. Questions about data manipulation in your recent work." Sarah finally looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "We've been reviewing the compound synthesis protocols, James. There are inconsistencies." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. This woman, this brilliant researcher I'd pulled from a failing graduate program, had been accessing my files for weeks. I'd noticed the security logs, the late-night logins, but I'd trusted her, trusted them both. What they didn't know was that I'd seen this coming. 3 weeks earlier, I'd noticed Sarah accessing my files during off hours. Security logs don't lie, even when people do. Marcus had been asking increasingly specific questions about my methodology, questions that went beyond normal curiosity. The signs were all there for someone who knew how to read them. "I see," I said quietly. "And what exactly are you alleging?" Marcus leaned forward, suddenly confident. "The synthesis pathway you documented doesn't match your reported results. We've been unable to replicate your findings." I almost smiled. Of course they couldn't replicate it. They were missing a crucial piece, one I'd been very careful to keep separate. You see, when you spend your entire career watching brilliant minds destroy each other over credit and recognition, you learn to protect yourself. "James," Stevens said, his tone becoming more formal, "given the seriousness of these concerns, we're placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 8 years of my life, 8 years of 60-hour weeks, missed birthdays, cancelled vacations, all reduced to this moment. I stood slowly, setting my security badge on his desk with deliberate precision. "I understand completely." Sarah looked almost disappointed, maybe hoping for anger, for threats, for something she could use to justify what they'd done. Instead, I simply nodded to each of them and walked out, my footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway like a funeral march. Back in my lab for the last time, I packed my personal items methodically. The microscope I'd used for countless late nights sat under its protective cover, its lens still focused on the last slide I'd examined. My hands trembled slightly as I touched its surface, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of what I was leaving behind. This wasn't just equipment. This was where I discovered the binding mechanism that could save thousands of lives. This was where I'd spent Christmas Eve 2 years ago, running final tests while my family waited at home. This was where Sarah had cried with joy when we first saw the cancer cells dying under treatment. Young Dr. Peterson from the neighboring lab stopped by, his face pale with shock. "James, I just heard. This is insane. Your work is solid. Everyone knows you're the most ethical researcher in this building." "Things change," I replied, placing my coffee mug in the cardboard box. The mug Elena had given me on my first day here, with "World's Best Scientist" painted in fading letters. People change. What Peterson didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this possibility. In research, you learn to protect your work, especially breakthrough work. You learn that not everyone has the same ethical standards, that ambition can corrupt even the most promising minds. As the elevator descended for the final time, I thought about the formula they believed they'd stolen. It was impressive work, groundbreaking even. It would pass initial trials, show promising results, maybe even make it to market, for a while. But there was something beautiful about the flaw I'd embedded, so subtle that even experienced researchers would miss it. A single amino acid substitution in the binding sequence, position 247. On paper, it looked like a natural variation. In practice, it wouldn't affect short-term stability or initial efficacy. The compound would work perfectly for months, maybe even a full year. Then it would become a nightmare. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the real documentation of my life's work. The complete synthesis pathway, including the correct sequence at position 247. 8 years of meticulous research, documented in my personal lab books, witnessed and dated. Sarah and Marcus had the impressive-looking decoy, but I had the actual breakthrough. My wife Eleanor found me there around midnight, still staring at the chemical structures that had consumed my life. "How are you holding up?" I looked up at her, this woman who'd supported me through graduate school, through failed experiments, through the long nights when I questioned everything I was doing. "Better than expected," I said, and for the first time that day, I genuinely smiled. She sat down beside me, studying the complex molecular diagrams spread across my desk. "Is this the real formula?" "This is everything," I said, touching the pages with something approaching reverence. "The complete pathway, the correct binding sequence, the purification protocols, everything they think they stole, but didn't. What happens now?" I closed the notebook and looked at her. "Now we wait, and we build something better." The call came 2 days later. Dr. Patricia Reeves from a competing biotech firm, someone I'd collaborated with years earlier on a different project. Her voice was warm, familiar, a stark contrast to the clinical coldness I'd endured in my final days at my previous position. "James, I heard about your situation. Completely ridiculous, by the way. Anyone who knows your work knows those allegations are baseless." "I appreciate that, Patricia. We'd like to discuss an opportunity with you. We're expanding our oncology division, looking for someone to lead a new research initiative. Significant funding, complete autonomy, and full intellectual property protection." The offer was generous, more generous than I'd expected, but what struck me most was the respect in her voice, the recognition of my actual contributions, rather than the manufactured doubts that had been used to destroy my reputation. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd already decided to accept before she finished her offer. Not for revenge, but for completion. Good science deserves to see the light of day, even if it takes a different path than originally planned. 6 weeks later, I was settled into my new laboratory, a pristine space with state-of-the-art equipment that made my previous setup look ancient. The team Patricia had assembled was impressive. Eager postdocs with fresh perspectives, experienced technicians who understood precision, and most importantly, legal protection for my intellectual property that my previous employer had never bothered to provide. I began synthesizing the correct version of my compound, the one with the proper amino acid sequence at position 247. Every step was documented, every result verified by independent observers. This time, there would be no questions about integrity, no room for theft or manipulation. Meanwhile, my former colleagues were celebrating. Sarah had been promoted to senior researcher, taking over my old position with a substantial salary increase. Marcus received a bonus that exceeded my annual salary from the previous year. The company announced their revolutionary new cancer treatment, with Sarah listed as lead researcher on the patent application. The announcement made national news. Stock prices soared by 40% in a single day. Sarah gave interviews on financial networks, speaking confidently about the compound's mechanism of action. She'd memorized my work well, even if she didn't truly understand the deeper implications of what she was discussing. I watched one of her interviews from my new office, noting how she stumbled slightly when asked about the binding kinetics, how she deflected questions about long-term stability testing. She knew the surface details, but the underlying science remained opaque to her. In my new lab, I continued my work quietly, methodically. The real compound showed even more promise than I'd originally hoped. Improved stability, enhanced bioavailability, fewer side effects. Everything the stolen formula claimed to be, but actually was. My new team was remarkable. Dr. Lisa Park, a brilliant synthetic chemist who understood molecular interactions with an intuition that rivaled my own. Dr. Michael Torres, a pharmacologist whose expertise in drug metabolism complemented my work perfectly. Together, we refined the formula, optimized the synthesis, and began preliminary testing that exceeded every expectation. 8 months after my termination, 8 months after Sarah and Marcus had celebrated their theft, the first signs of trouble began to emerge. I was reviewing data from our latest trials when my phone buzzed. Eleanor calling from her office with an urgency I rarely heard in her voice. "James, you need to see the news. It's about your old company." I pulled up the financial news website on my computer, my hands steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. The headline made me pause, not from surprise, but from the weight of inevitability. Biotech giant faces crisis as wonder drug shows unexpected toxicity. I clicked through to the full article, reading details that I'd anticipated for months. Clinical trial data revealed severe long-term side effects from their cancer treatment. The compound was breaking down after extended use, creating toxic metabolites that damaged healthy tissue. Patients who had shown initial improvement were now experiencing organ damage, neurological symptoms, and in some cases, accelerated tumor growth. The FDA had suspended all trials immediately. Emergency protocols were in place to monitor existing patients. The company's legal team was preparing for an avalanche of lawsuits. The details were exactly what I'd expected. The amino acid substitution at position 247 created a binding site instability that only manifested after prolonged exposure. Initially, the compound bound correctly to cancer cell receptors, blocking growth signals and inducing controlled cell death. But after months of treatment, the modified amino acid began to degrade, creating a metabolite that actually stimulated tumor growth while simultaneously attacking healthy neural tissue. It was beautiful in a purely scientific sense, terrible from a business and human perspective. The company's stock price collapsed. Overnight, they lost $400 million in market value. Sarah's confident interviews were replaying on financial networks, her explanations now sounding hollow and naive against the backdrop of failed trials and investor lawsuits. The follow-up articles painted an even more devastating picture. The company faced multiple federal investigations. The FDA launched a formal review of their research practices, questioning how such a fundamental flaw had been missed during development. Sarah was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Marcus was terminated immediately, his career in pharmaceutical research effectively over. I sat in my office reading the reports with something approaching clinical detachment. This wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like completion. The scientific method had worked as intended. Bad science revealed itself, eventually. Truth had a way of surfacing, regardless of who tried to bury it. My phone lit up with a text from Dr. Peterson, my former neighbor in the lab. Did you see the news? The whole oncology division is being restructured. Sarah's formula was flawed from the beginning. How did she miss something so basic? Everyone's saying this will destroy the company. I stared at the message for a long time before setting my phone aside without responding. Peterson was a good scientist, but he'd never learned the most important lesson in research. Trust, but verify. Even your own data, especially when others have access to it. Dr. Reeves knocked on my office door, her expression mixing concern with barely contained excitement. James, I just got off the phone with the patent office. Our application has been approved. Congratulations. You're officially the lead inventor on what's looking like the most promising oncology treatment in a decade. Our version, the correct version, had passed every trial with remarkable success. Clean synthesis, stable compound, minimal side effects. The binding mechanism worked exactly as designed, with no degradation products, no unexpected metabolites, everything that good science should be. There's something else, Patricia continued, settling into the chair across from my desk. 3 major pharmaceutical companies have reached out about licensing deals. Conservative estimates suggest this could be worth over $200 million in the first 5 years alone. But James, she paused, studying my expression. There's something I need to ask you. I waited, knowing what was coming. The molecular structure of your compound. It's remarkably similar to the one that just failed at your former company. Almost identical, except for... She pulled out a printed comparison. 1 amino acid substitution, position 247. I met her gaze steadily. Yes, that's an incredibly specific difference, almost like... She trailed off. Like someone knew exactly what would go wrong, I finished for her. Patricia leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. James, did you know their formula would fail? I considered my answer carefully. Patricia, when you spend 8 years developing a compound, you test every possible variation. You document every result, including the failures. Position 247 was one of the first variations I tested, back in year 2. It showed initial promise, then became catastrophically toxic after extended exposure. And you never published that data. It was negative data. Most journals won't publish negative results, especially preliminary ones, but I documented everything in my personal lab books. She stared at me for a long moment. They stole your work, didn't they? Not just borrowed or collaborated, actually stole it. They took what they could access. Unfortunately for them, they didn't have access to everything. That evening, Eleanor and I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The silence between us was comfortable, the kind that comes from 20 years of marriage and shared understanding. Any regrets? She asked finally. I thought about it carefully, considering every aspect of what had transpired. About protecting my work, number about how things ended. Maybe. You could have warned them. Could I? They'd already made their choice. They wanted shortcuts, credit for work they didn't do. That's not how science works. The truth was more complex than I could easily explain. I'd tried to do things the right way for 8 years. Collaborative research, shared credit, team success. I'd trained Sarah from a struggling graduate student into a capable researcher. I'd mentored Marcus, shared my techniques, my insights, my passion for the work. But when people decide to steal your life's work, when they fabricate evidence to destroy your reputation and steal your discoveries, they accept the consequences that come with it. A news alert popped up on my phone. The investigation into my former company had revealed additional irregularities. Turns out, Sarah and Marcus had been falsifying data for months, not just stealing my formula. Other researchers were coming forward with similar stories of theft and manipulation. The company's entire research division was under federal investigation. I opened my laptop and began writing an email to Dr. Peterson. He deserved to know what had really happened, even if he couldn't do anything about it now. Some bridges are worth rebuilding, especially with people who still believe in honest research. 1 year later, I stood in my new laboratory, watching a team of 12 researchers working on Phase 3 trials of our compound. The results were extraordinary. Patient responses exceeded every projection. Side effects remained minimal. The scientific community was calling it a breakthrough comparable to the discovery of penicillin. But the real satisfaction came from the letters we received from patients and their families. Stories of tumors shrinking, of life expectancies extended from months to years, of children who would grow up with their parents because of work we'd done in this laboratory. Mrs. Henderson, a 34-year-old mother of 2, had been given 3 months to live when she entered our trial. 18 months later, she was cancer-free. Her letter, framed on my office wall, simply read, "Thank you for not giving up on us." That's what good science looks like when it's allowed to work properly, when integrity matters more than ambition, when collaboration builds on truth rather than theft. At the monthly board meeting, Patricia announced that 2 major pharmaceutical companies were bidding for exclusive licensing rights. The numbers were staggering. More money than I'd ever imagined, certainly more than I'd ever made at my previous position. But more importantly, the compound was entering Phase 4 trials across 15 countries. Regulatory approval was expected within 18 months. Within 3 years, this treatment would be available to cancer patients worldwide. My assistant knocked and entered, her expression uncertain. "Doctor, Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. Says her name is Sarah Chen." I found her in the lobby, looking older, more tired than I remembered. The confident researcher who had spoken so eloquently on television was gone, replaced by someone who seemed smaller, diminished. She stood when she saw me, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "James, thank you for seeing me." "What can I do for you, Sarah?" "I wanted to apologize for everything. I know that doesn't change what happened, but..." She trailed off, looking around the impressive lobby of my new workplace. I was wrong about everything. "You made a choice," I said quietly. "We all did. I was young, ambitious. Marcus convinced me that you were holding the team back, that you'd never publish, never share credit." She looked directly at me for the first time. "He said you were just another old researcher blocking progress." The pain in her voice was genuine, and for a moment, I remembered the brilliant graduate student I'd first met years ago. The one who stayed late asking questions, who genuinely loved the science. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "Teaching. High school chemistry. It's humbling." She managed a weak smile. "Turns out I'm better at explaining science than doing it. The kids keep me honest. Can't fake understanding with teenagers." I walked her to the elevator, noting how she moved with less confidence than before, how she seemed to have aged more than the year that had passed. "Sarah, if you ever want to come back to research, real research, let me know. Everyone deserves a second chance." Her eyes widened with something that might have been hope. "After everything?" Science is about learning from mistakes. That includes mine. As the elevator doors closed, I thought about the path that had brought me here. The betrayal, the hidden flaw, the collapse of their stolen formula, and ultimately, the success of the real breakthrough. Not revenge exactly, just the natural consequence of choosing shortcuts over substance. Sometimes the best response to theft isn't confrontation or legal action. It's simply continuing to do the work properly, with integrity, letting time reveal the difference between authentic innovation and borrowed brilliance. Good science, like truth, has a way of surfacing eventually. The compound I'd spent 8 years developing was now helping patients across 3 continents. The stolen version had destroyed careers, cost hundreds of millions in losses, and worse, had given false hope to desperate patients before failing catastrophically. The difference between them was a single amino acid, position 247, and the integrity to get it right. In the end, that's all that really matters in science. Getting it right even when others choose the easier path, especially then.